It's Wisconsin Today. I'm Kate Archer-Kent.
And I'm Rob Farrett. A fresh wave of protests swept across the country on Saturday.
Here in Wisconsin, it was the second time this month that thousands of people in communities all over the state voiced opposition to President Trump's policies and executive orders.
A demonstrator in Milwaukee held up a sign reading "Pro-America, Anti-Trump."
Outside a Tesla charging station in Madison, Monica Harkey of Madison wore an inflatable astronaut suit.
And so I made a sign saying, "Bring empathy back to Earth," because he's kind of against empathy. And the other side says, "In search of STEM funding," because that's being cut. It's not cool.
Saturday's nationwide anti-Trump protest came just 2 weeks after the Hands Off rally. Organizers estimate that protest drew millions of people in the largest single-day rally of President Trump's second term.
Douglas McLeod is a professor in the School of Journalism and Mass Communication at UW-Madison, where he researches media coverage of protests. Doug, welcome to Wisconsin Today.
Oh, thank you very much.
So as we see what unfolded over the weekend here in Wisconsin and across the country, what are your big takeaways?
My big takeaways is I think it's nice to see democracy in action. It's nice to see demonstrators well behaved. When protesters engage in acts of violence or property damage, it often backfires on them. Regardless of whether they're left-wing or right-wing protesters, I'm always inspired by peaceful demonstrations that show citizen engagement.
How does this compare to other protests that you have researched or seen in recent history?
Yeah, so there's a lot of differences in protest in terms of goals, strategies, and tactics. I tend to look at things from the perspective of someone who studies media coverage of protests. And despite all the diversity and different protest forms, one of the things that we see when we look at social protest is the commonalities when it comes to media coverage. We've studied all sorts of protest groups over time, left-wing groups, right-wing groups, pro-life, pro-choice groups, all across the political spectrum. And oftentimes the media coverage comes down looking very similar. And we've identified a protest paradigm, which is kind of a way that journalists tell protest stories. That's common across all sorts of different kinds of protests.
I want to get to the paradigm in just a moment, but I want to first unpack this. You saw signs that looked at a range of issues: Social Security, DOGE, Medicaid cuts, cancer research. And, does it matter that the protesters aren't rallied around a single issue?
That's a very interesting question. I think the challenge of any protest group is to get your message out. What are your goals? What are you saying? What are you trying to do? That's often easiest when you have a single unified goal that's, very upfront and everybody says this is the protest about issue X. That doesn't mean you can't be diverse in terms of the issues that you care about. You just have to be even more vigilant to make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page and sort of have a bullet point list of things that we want to say that are reflected in our signs, and get the word out to the public so they understand that this is a multifaceted protest.
And when it comes to the numbers, organizers earlier this month estimated attendance to be around 3 and 5 million, making it one of the biggest single-day protests in recorded U.S. history. What goes into estimating crowd size and how it's being reported?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and there is a science to it for people who are kind of professional crowd estimates. Anytime you see a protest or even a presidential inauguration, both sides tend to move the numbers in the directions that fit their ideological perspective. So the simplest way to do it sometimes is kind of look for the middle of what you're hearing from the right and what you're hearing from the left. But I'm not an expert in crowd size estimation, but I believe they use a lot of aerial photography and population density and things like that.
Well, we also have seen that activists connected with this movement have criticized the media for underplaying the size and scale of these recent protests and calling the movement unfocused. Is there a history of that large, unwieldy coalitions and how they fared politically?
Yeah, so protest size is a very important determinant of the success of a protest. I would say size and duration, how long you sustain a protest. A one-day protest tends to come and go. So obviously, the size of the crowd and the number of protests is something very important to protesters that they want to get across. They want people to see that this is not an isolated group of people, that this is a broadly shared perspective that is a significant portion of the population.
We're talking with UW-Madison professor Doug McLeod about recent protests against the Trump administration after we saw a weekend of demonstrators around the country, here in Wisconsin, organized by the grassroots 50-51 movement, and that stands for 50 protests, 50 states, one day. Doug, you mentioned the protest paradigm. Can you go more into that? What is it?
Sure, yeah, it's a pattern, almost like a cookbook recipe that journalists often use, apparently, to tell a protest story. They learn some of that in journalism schools, like the school that I teach in. That this is how you go about writing a protest story. They observe their colleagues writing stories this way. They arrive at a protest, and one of the things they're looking for is what happened, right? And to some degree, a chronology of what happened. And so often they end up focusing on physical events, what we call episodic framing. This happened, then this happened, then this happened, and then this many people were arrested, rather than thematic coverage that focuses on the underlying issues. So that's one of the big characteristics, focus on the episodes and events rather than the underlying themes and issue positions.
So when you're not focusing on the issues and what is being said, maybe outside of some chanting that's aired in a piece, what gets lost?
Well, really what gets lost is social movements in this country have a long history of being an impetus for positive social change. The obvious example is the civil rights movement, which changed our agenda of a century of Jim Crow laws and other kinds of things. First thing it did was draw attention to some of the problems, put the issue on the public agenda, got people in Congress, got their attention, put it on the congressional agenda, and positive change, a lot of it took place. That translated into the anti-war movement in Vietnam that started to promote a kind of self-reflective criticism of what we were doing in Southeast Asia. So one of the problems with the protest paradigm coverage for a lot of protest movements, and this is left-wing and right-wing protest movements, have a hard time getting that critique, their ideas across. And often that leads to frustration. Often that leads to property damage, sometimes conflicts with the police. That's a big focus of most stories that come from the protest paradigm. Clashes with the police, property damage, blocking traffic, and civil disobedience. If they don't engage in that, they often don't get covered. When they do get covered for property damage, violence, civil disobedience, that coverage is often very negative. And so what do we see as a public? It tends to be, if they're peaceful and are trying to say something, we don't see it. When we do see it, it's violence, property damage, and it looks fairly destructive. So what I think the long-term consequences are is that we don't, as a community, as a society, really appreciate the positive impact that social protests can have in bringing about social change.
You also look closely at word choices of protest movements, and with this latest one calling itself the resistance, what stands out to you about that term?
Yeah, so what you're referring to is framing, and we look at, that's one of the things we do when we study protest is what word choice. You can frame a protest, demonstration, you can frame it as a movement, you can frame it as a resistance. Word choice is important when it comes to public understanding of what's going on. Resistance is an interesting choice of words internally to mobilize a group. I think it's very powerful, that it's an active term that we're resisting, and resistance really sort of triggers memories of the French resistance in World War II, and when you're facing a system that you don't like, resistance is very mobilizing. On the other hand, when we look at framing and how people understand it, We're not just looking at how a movement understands itself, but how does the larger society and how does the power structure understand that movement? Yeah. There, I think the choice of the term resistance could be a little bit more problematic, and it may fit this protest paradigm news coverage that protesters are troublemakers.
We've seen these protests. We also have seen economic boycotts, which, consumers encouraged to boycott major businesses. And I'm wondering, how do boycotts figure into this larger strategy of a protest movement?
Yeah, there's boycotts and then there's boycotts. Sometimes instead of withholding your consumption patterns, you also encourage certain kinds of consumption. And I think both of those kinds of strategies are good in the sense that they're not violent. They're harder to turn around and delegitimize a movement. Both media and the opposition, it's harder to sort of criticize that. In that sense, they're very positive. Of course, whether they're effective depends on how many people follow the boycott. If you can get a lot of people following it, it can have a huge, huge impact. The problem is, how do you get that done? So protesters movements often use social media, word of mouth. Sometimes they get that message through the media coverage. That's a little bit harder of a filter to get through. It can have a big impact if the word is out and enough people participate and follow it.
Doug, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
That is Doug McLeod, a professor in the School of Journalism and Mass Communication at UW-Madison, where he researches media coverage of protests. We've been talking about the latest wave of rallies in opposition to the Trump administration's executive orders and policies.
Coming up on Wisconsin Today, the Appleton Area School District wants to deal with chronically absent students in new ways. Hear from the superintendent on next steps.
We're just trying to get a student and their family to engage with us who currently are not.
And the state education department on how they approach the issue of students missing from class. That's coming up next here on WPR News. It's Wisconsin Today. I'm Rob Farrett.
And I'm Kate Archer-Kent. The State Department of Public Instruction has released annual data on chronic absenteeism, or how often students miss more than 1 in 10 school days.
Although the rate is still higher than before the COVID pandemic, there's some good news. Year over year, chronic absenteeism was down nearly 2 percentage points in the last school year.
Still, some students miss school at much higher rates, and we'll find out how the state education department is working on this issue.
First, we turn to the Appleton School District, where leaders are wrestling with chronic absenteeism now and plan to make changes.
Greg Harchus is superintendent of the Appleton Area School District. He has been working in the district since 1992. Superintendent Harchus, welcome to Wisconsin Today.
Yeah, thank you for the invite.
How serious of a problem is chronic absenteeism in your district?
Very, very serious. And so we came out of the pandemic really with a different mindset from students and families and really staff. And so in that first year after the pandemic, 1/3 of our high school students were chronically absent, which meant that they missed more than 10% of the school year, so more than 18 days. And we've improved a little bit, but we remain at about 25% of our high school students are missing 18 or more days. And the kids we're most concerned about are those that are missing more than 50 days. And so last year, that was just under 300 students in our high schools that missed more than 50 days of school. And we just simply know that kids are going to struggle to be successful when they miss that many days of school.
You mentioned a different mindset coming out of the pandemic. What is behind this mindset? What do you see?
Well, certainly there is more concerns about illnesses, right, and diseases, and if my child is sick, or is my child going to pick up an illness from another student, and I think with each year we are removed from the pandemic, that's waning a little bit. But then there also is just simply there's a lot more mental health struggles, and it's a combination of most likely many factors for a student. But we're certainly seeing that increase in mental health challenges for our students is impacting their attendance.
Impacting attendance. So, 6 years ago, the Appleton District does away with the truancy law over concerns over punitive measures like fines and suspensions and court appearances. And now, leadership in the district, they're searching for ways to reduce the record amount of students who are missing class. What solutions are you proposing to reduce students who are missing class?
So, over the last 6 years, since the attendance ordinance has gone away in Appleton, when that was discontinued, we've had to put different pieces in place to support students in a different way, in a very much in a more positive way. And that is definitely fits with our vision as a district for how we should support students. And so we have a very robust 3-tier system of support for students that we didn't have 6 years ago. The struggle is there is a state law that requires students to be enrolled and consistently attending school until the age of 18, but that state law has to be enforced at the municipal level. And so over the last 6 years, without that assistance from the city in enforcing that, it really falls on our staff to do everything we can. That's all very positive to come to school, but there's still an element of kids that are not engaging. So just, at this point, we have 20 students across our high schools that have missed more than 100 days of school. And so we've gone to the city and asked for that ordinance to be reinstated to enforce the state law.
There is debate, however, over whether punitive measures like ticketing or involving law enforcement actually encourages students to return to class, or whether it causes further harm and distress to families, especially families who are low income. What do you make of that?
Yeah, we definitely recognize that, and we know all the research. But what we're struggling with is how do we say that we don't ever give up on a student, and then say to a student, we don't have anything more for you. And where we're struggling is the kids who just simply aren't engaging and their family is not engaging. We feel like we've exhausted all of our resources in trying to get a student to come to school. And it's not working for some kids. And it's a very, very small percentage, So we have 4,400 high school students. We're talking 20 to 30 students that are completely disengaged from school. So it's those students where we look and say, we don't want to be punitive in any way, but all of our positive supports are not working. And so that's where we're thinking that we do need at least something that is going to bring a student and their family to the table, where right now they're not willing to come to the table at all to discuss how we can support them.
What caught our attention in the Appleton Post-Crescent were the reports that a truancy court could sentence students to wear electronic ankle monitors or even face jail time. That specific piece, though, was dissolved in 2019, and you have said that there is an interest in bringing back a court like this. But how do you rebuild trust with community who are skeptical of a new truancy law?
So, two pieces. One is there's a lot of misinformation in our community around what truancy court was prior to 2019, and either the lack of success or the success. And so I think it's been very challenging for us to dispel some of the myths around truancy court. It was successful for many students, but then it was overly punitive for other students. And so, that's been a little bit challenging for us to try to get people to understand that there were some successes that came out of truancy court. With that being said, we do not have any interest in bringing that back as a school. We, as a district, know that we were overly punitive. We simply went to kind of I guess I would say old-fashioned methods of disciplining and around attendance. So we would jump to detentions, in-school suspensions, and suspensions, and we certainly wouldn't do that anymore. And so we hope that our community will trust us when we say we truly are looking for all the positive ways that we can support a student, and we're not asking for truancy court to come back. We're just simply asking for an ordinance. And when we think about this ask, it is not an extreme ask because most, if not all, school districts in the state have this ordinance. Most, if not all, municipalities are working with their school system. So this ask that we have is just simply the norm in most, if not all, districts in the state of Wisconsin. So we're really struggling with why this is considered too extreme for some folks when really this is the norm across our state.
I want to find out, though, you mentioned that truancy court, in some instances, it worked. And I wonder, what did you see working and what can you glean from that?
So our supports around attendance and truancy have always had a progression, right? Where we're maybe supporting a student with their school counselor or an alt ed teacher, and then perhaps the dean and the assistant principal are going to get involved. And then at some point in the truancy court process, the school resource officer would get engaged, and then possibly even the judge. And so within that time when they were working, a student and a family were working with a school resource officer, they're sharing just kind of, the scenario of what happens if you continue to miss this much school. There's a legal piece to it, and we call those civics lessons. And so many students would end up in a civics lesson, and that would be the judge along with the school resource officer coming together with a group of maybe 30 students who were at that point where they were almost ready to move into that legal system around attendance. And so it would be explained to them that this is the kind of the road you're going down, and these would be some of the outcomes for you. And so that really got the attention of kids where they're like, I need to change my behaviors. I need to make going to school more of a priority. And so really it was that work with a school resource officer that we think was beneficial in the truancy process. And that's something we don't have right now because there is not a citation that would bring a school resource officer into the picture for a student.
If the district succeeds in bringing back students who are chronically absent, you said at the outset, you've exhausted with these students the three-tier system of support. How will the district support them once they return? What would you do differently?
What we've looked to do is build a plan that would work for them. And so we would start with, could you come in one day a week? Maybe it starts with, could you come in one morning a week, just to get them acclimated to school again and get them into a routine of getting up and coming to school. And maybe we can build that into 2 days and 3 days, or perhaps it's taking advantage of one of our many alternative programs. So we have several alternative programs that are different models. It might be a half day of school and a half day of work. We have different programs that we partner with Fox Valley Technical College. So really, we're just trying to get a student and their family to engage with us who currently are not. And so from there, it's to build a plan that works with what they can do in terms of coming to school. And then the hope is we can build and build and build to the point where would they be able to come to school every day for full days? That's what we would look to do.
Superintendent Hartjes, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to share something that our district is really passionate about, and that's making sure that students are successful.
That is Greg Hartjes, the superintendent of Appleton Area School District. He joined us to talk about how the district is grappling with chronic absenteeism. And now we turn to Julie Incity, a school social work consultant for the State Department of Public Instruction. She works on preventing absenteeism on a statewide level. Julie, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
There are the new numbers from the Department of Public Instruction showing there are less chronically absent students than last school year. What is working?
Yeah, what we're finding is really working around Wisconsin is when school leaders are collaborating with students, families, and other agencies and community partners so that the different systems can come together, from the school leaders to the judges, the youth justice professionals and child welfare professionals, working with families and kids to really look at what are the root causes of barriers to school attendance, and then really accessing the local community's strengths to meet those barriers, to have everyone finding solutions together that work for them.
What are some local community strengths that could intervene in this moment and really help?
Sure. Well, for example, in Janesville, the superintendent was able to leverage their relationship with the transportation department, and they were able to secure free bus passes for all of the students year round so that those students could have transportation to out of school time programs, additional support from the district, summertime programs, and making sure that they're getting to and from school on time each day. So those types of partnerships between community leaders, businesses, organizations, when everyone comes together to creatively problem solve, that can be really helpful.
It seems as if low-income families are at a much higher risk for chronic absenteeism. Nearly low-income families at nearly 30%. Why is that?
Well, families face a lot of compounded and complex challenges. There's health barriers, for example, limited access to care, or untreated illness can lead to more missed days. If there's higher rates of chronic conditions in this population and maybe a lack of health care or health education, there's transportation issues, not having reliable transportation, or even just having less choice in a home that you can rent or buy, and it might be farther from school or not be near a bus route. There is housing instability, so that might lead to more frequent moves between school districts. There might be a delay in enrolling in the next school district as they are looking for the paperwork that's needed. There's different family responsibilities. So older students might stay home to help care for siblings, or they might have to work to help the family. They might lack some basic needs. So kids sometimes are missing school because they don't have a change of clothes, and they don't want to face the shame or bullying that might go along with that. Or they might be facing some hunger issues, and so that's what they're concentrating on during the school day and can't really focus on math or reading. They might also just be at an increased risk or of exposure to trauma or mental health challenges in the family, and then limited access to mental health supports. And then, just different systemic issues that might be within the school district, not making sure that all kids have the same access. For example, a high school might charge fees for certain classes, and that family might have a hard time paying for that, and that has some repercussions for the student and their feeling of being included and like having relationships at the school and that sense of belonging. So that might have less of a pull for them to attend every day.
At the state and federal level, there are many different ways to look at students who miss class, who miss school. There's truancy. We talk about chronic absenteeism and habitual truancy. What is important to know about how we measure how often students are absent?
Yeah, so truancy is defined as just when a student misses school and it's an unexcused absence. So truancy only gives us part of the picture of what's happening with a student, whereas chronic absenteeism, missing 10% of the school year for any reason, that lets us know that a student is missing out on the chance for learning and academic engagement, as well as social skills in that interaction. So chronic absenteeism is what the research is based on, because it's a consistent measure where you can look at it and say, okay, students that are chronically absent in as early as kindergarten will have lower math and reading scores in third grade. And students who are not on track by third grade then go on to have more challenges in fifth and sixth grade. And we even know that students in ninth grade who are chronically absent have a lower likelihood of graduating. So all of the data about outcomes and risks of negative outcomes for students, it's really based on chronic absenteeism. When we're talking about truancy and school districts and like making a referral to a municipal court or to the youth justice system for truancy, we're really talking about habitual truancy. And habitual truancy is defined in Wisconsin as when a student misses part or all of 5 days in one semester. But that is defined differently by each school district in Wisconsin. So that isn't a consistent measure, and it doesn't really tell us how much time a student has missed and how much they've been disengaged from their learning. For example, one student might be considered habitually truant, and they might have missed 5 part days over a 2-month period, whereas another student who has habitual truancy might have missed 30 days over a 2-month period. So just because they're both determined to be habitually truant, it doesn't really tell us how much time they've missed from learning, and it doesn't tell us the root cause of their challenges, and it doesn't tell us what's the best intervention then for them.
Thank you for explaining those distinctions and the impact. I really appreciate it. Julie, thank you so much for joining us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
That is Julie Incity, a school social work consultant for the State Department of Public Instruction. Earlier, we heard from Appleton Area School District Superintendent Greg Harchis. We've been talking about efforts to help reduce the number of Wisconsin students who are chronically absent from school. And you can share your thoughts on this issue and solutions you've seen at work in your school district or your classroom. Email wisconsintoday@wpr.org. That's wisconsintoday@wpr.org.
Coming up, meet John Francis, known as the Planetwalker, for his long walks to advocate for the environment.
I was silent, and so I was listening to a lot of the environment around me and the people who I encountered. I didn't speak for 17 years.
He shares his story and his time in Wisconsin coming up.
It's Wisconsin Today. I'm Kate Archer-Kent.
And I'm Rob Farrett. In 1971, John Francis witnessed the devastation caused by the San Francisco Bay oil spill, and he made a vow to stop riding in motorized vehicles.
For 22 years, he walked across America on foot, and he spent 17 of those years under a vow of silence, using his banjo and his hands to express himself. He earned the nickname the Planetwalker.
During that silent journey, he walked the entire width of the lower 48 states, and he stopped in Wisconsin for a few years to earn his PhD in land resources at the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies at UW-Madison.
He later returned to Wisconsin as a visiting associate professor and served on the Nelson Institute's Board of Visitors.
Now he's the subject of a 2024 documentary short film about his journey called Planetwalker. It was shortlisted for this year's Oscars.
He had this saying that he would write on the board when he taught classes at the University in Madison. Live today what you believe. 5 words. Simple, right? Not simple, I don't think.
There's a kind of integrity about John that is uncommon. And just that alone really spills over.
When you start your graduate study in your PhD, it's very much, so what's your dissertation going to be? And it took me a year maybe of being in Madison. That's when I decided on oil spills, that I would write on oil spills.
The film will be screened along with an audience conversation with Francis at the 2025 Earth Fest tomorrow at UW-Madison.
The Planetwalker himself joins us now to talk about his journey and his time in Wisconsin. John, welcome to Wisconsin Today.
Thanks for having me.
Can you take us back, John, to a pivotal moment in your life? You were in the San Francisco Bay Area when an oil spill hit. What went through your mind when you heard about that and saw the impact?
Well, I had never seen an oil spill, and I heard that there were two tankers that collided beneath the Golden Gate Bridge or close to it. And I asked my girlfriend, who was actually happened to be a Standard Oil heiress, if she wanted to go in and see that. And she did. So we jumped in our car and we drove off to San Francisco. And when we got there, the thing that really stuck with me is the smell. I had never smelled an oil spill before. It was something that was overwhelming. You just couldn't turn away from it. Even if you couldn't see it, it was all pervasive. And that was the moment when I said to my girlfriend, I said, maybe we should get out of our cars and start walking. I wanted to really make some kind of impact. And I decided that giving up riding in cars would be a start. My girlfriend, she said, that's very nice, but, we don't have enough money to give up riding in cars. She said that people would just think that we were a couple of bums and it wouldn't make any difference. And I agreed with her. I thought, oh yeah, that's it. If we had enough money, we could do it. When I finally did it, it was because a friend, a deputy sheriff in the town I lived in, Jerry Tanner, he had passed away. He was lost on a motorboat with his family. And my girlfriend and I decided we were going to walk to it was a Lion's Share, a nightclub, and dance for Jerry to just kind of remember Jerry and to celebrate his life. And it was on that walk that I decided that, I'm already walking. This is what I want to do. I'm going to keep walking, realizing that, we don't have any promise for tomorrow showing up. So I was going to use my life to celebrate not only Jerry's life, but to celebrate the environments.
And you didn't just stop riding in motorized vehicles and walk to the store and back home, right? You went on epic walks. You made walking a symbol in a lot of ways. Can you talk about the scope of your walking?
Well, yeah, there were just to begin, walking. I lived about 4 miles from the nearest town, Point Reyes Station. And so a lot of my friends, would go over to Point Reyes Station from Inverness to play volleyball. And they would invite me, John, come on, let's go play. And I, was walking. So I would walk the 4 miles over there. But by the time I got there, the game would be over, or they would have another game just for me. And during the summer, I would take longer walks up to Oregon and discover wilderness areas in Oregon. The Kamloops was one of my favorite wilderness areas up in the Northwest. And I would walk up there carrying a banjo, and then I'd walk back. So about 500 miles. I like to make a 500-mile walk every summer. Soon after I gave up riding in cars, I had been arguing with so many people about whether one person could make a difference that I decided to not speak for one day. And that was on my birthday, my 27th birthday. But what I did do was listen. And what I heard really surprised me, because I thought I knew so much. I thought I knew everything. And when I really listened to people speaking and didn't sit myself up or set myself to argue with them, I learned from them. And I learned about them and about who they were. And I learned about who I was. And I decided that one day was going to, I was going to take that for another day and another day. It lasted a week before I was even more concerned than my neighbors were about when I was going to start speaking. And I decided that I had been learning so much that maybe I should not speak for a year. And then I would revisit that decision on my birthday. I didn't speak for 17 years.
Amazing. And how did you communicate with people?
Well, I use mime and acting out. Sometimes I used what was called signing, signing exact English, for people who knew that. And I had some deaf friends who knew signing exact English. But I also played the banjo and painted. So I painted every day, and I kept a journal. So I would share those things with someone who I would want to communicate with.
As I hear you talk about the walks and the, in effect, vow of silence, the word pilgrimage keeps popping into my head. Was there a spiritual element in this that either intentionally from the beginning or that emerged over time for you?
There is a spiritual element to this, and I don't think it happened right away. I think the reason why I started my silence was because I just felt I argued so much. But as I listened and as I walked and as I became very intimate with the environment and the people around me, the silence did become a spiritual journey as well. And it would take me back to my high school years when I went to a Catholic high school and, thought that I had a vocation as a monk, as a Trappist monk. When I learned that the monks didn't speak, that they took a code of silence, I just thought, oh, God, no, I could never do that. So it was,
and then there you were doing it.
Yeah, kind of ironic, as you say. There I was walking and not talking, and I guess I was living the life of an itinerant monk.
We're talking to John Francis, also known as the Planetwalker. John, take us to Wisconsin. What brought you here to get a PhD in land resources?
I had looked, I looked at graduate schools. I had just finished my master's degree at the University of Montana in Missoula. And I wrote to the University of Wisconsin because one of my professors at Montana mentioned the environmental studies program at Wisconsin. And I got an answer back saying, we would like for you to apply to the PhD program, and we think we can support you. And of course, I was shocked. I could hardly believe it. My father had come to visit me while I was in Watertown, and I showed him the letter, and he looked at it, and he says, yeah, this looks like they're going to give you money. and I laughed at that because, my dad was very, particular about who's going to support you, who's going to pay for this. I thought, well, gee, maybe that's true, because if my father thinks that, then I'm on my way to Madison. And so I did. I walked to Madison, and
from Montana.
Yeah. And so the rest is history, I guess you say.
I want to talk about lessons learned. You had that question. You had people arguing with you. Can one person make a difference when it comes to the environment? Now, here we are, 2025. People look at climate change, extreme weather events, and may feel overwhelmed. What do you say to someone now who asks you, can one person make a difference?
When I walked across the country, there were a number of people that I ran into who were just kind to me. I mean, you can imagine I'm an African American. It's in the 1980s, and I'm alone. I don't speak, and I carry a banjo. And as my parents thought that would be an invitation for some kind of violence, or that I would never make it. They were so afraid that I would not make it across the country unscathed. And the kindness that people showed me was also a lesson for me to understand how each person made a huge difference in my life by being kind. And we all can make a difference in each other's lives by, following that same path of kindness. When I had finished my graduate studies at Madison, and I started speaking on the 20th anniversary of Earth Day, what I realized is that since we're all part of the environment, then how we treat each other is really our first opportunity to treat the environment in a sustainable way, or even understand what we mean by sustainability. And so environment to me became not just about pollution and loss of species and habitat, but also about human rights and gender equality and economic equity and all the ways that we relate to one another. If we oppress each other, if we exploit each other, it's all going to manifest in the physical environment around us.
And finally, John, I wanted to ask you about your nonprofit Planetwalk and the work you're doing today.
Well, Planetwalk was the nonprofit I founded back in 1982, before I left walking around the world. When I had graduated from Southern Oregon State College in '79, I graduated with the long-term goal to walk and sail around the planet as part of my education, in the spirit and hope that I could be of benefit to humankind. And so now Planetwalk is, after I got to the East Coast and was able to work at the Coast Guard and sail through the Caribbean and walk the length of South America, now Planetwalk is in Africa. And I'm walking from Cape Town to Cairo. And we're bringing a medical pop-up clinic, and we're partnered with the GLOBE program, Global Learning and Observation to Benefit the Environment. And now we're also founding Planetwalk clubs through K through 12 schools around the country. So,
John, we'll leave it there. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you very much.
That was John Francis, environmentalist, author, and Planetwalker, known for his 22 years walking across America on foot and his 17 years of silence. He earned his PhD in land resources at the Nelson Institute at UW-Madison. A documentary short film about his journey called Planetwalker was shortlisted for this year's Oscars. It screens along with a conversation with Francis at the 2025 Earth Fest held tomorrow at UW-Madison. You can see more, including some pictures of his journeys along the way, online at WPR.org. We'll go out to the sound of John's banjo playing us out. It's been called the Oscars of community colleges, and Wisconsin is bringing home the prize.
Southwest Wisconsin Technical College in Fenimore won the 2025 Aspen Prize for Community College Excellence. The $1 million prize was announced last week.
In that announcement, the prize committee cited the college's high completion rate, including for lower-income students, along with career readiness and positive job outcomes.
Southwest Tech also got high praise for its hands-on training in career fields.
Are you part of the Southwest Tech community? Student, staff, faculty, or graduate? What do you want the rest of the state to know about the program there? Or are you part of another technical college that's doing great work you want to share?
Tell us about it. Email wisconsintoday@wpr.org or call or text to get in touch at 888-642-0232. And congratulations, Southwest Tech.
Wisconsin Today producers include Rochelle Wilson, Mackenzie Crummy, and Beatrice Lawrence. Our technical directors are Sarah Hopeful and Tyler Ditter. Learn more about us at wpr.org/Wisconsin Today. I'm Rob Farrett.
And I'm Kate Archer-Kent. You're listening to WPR News.